Hello and welcome to Editor's Pick, Episode 2 of War Elephant Podcast. I'm Ian and I'm joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Christine and I'm greatly appreciative to be here. Thank you so much, Ian.
All right, so after our last episode, which we were joined by our founder, John Davis, the War Elephant, we are going to be continuing. We'll have a rotating series of co-hosts, both those who agree with us, those who disagree with us in large ways and in small ways, because the big point of this podcast is discussion, is being able to converse and disagree and find nuances and truth. We're all pursuing truth. So we have a nice slate of discussion topics today. Our first one is something that Christine brought to our attention. War Elephant has a long history of being very tuned into and joined by a lot of military members. So we're going to be including a little bit of something connected to not just the U.S. military, but primarily the U.S. military. And Christine came up with a very interesting news story and I think a good message. So Christine, take us away.
All right. Well, Ian, it came out very recently here, actually just in the past couple of days. The military tracks suicide among active duty and former military members. And this has been a problem for quite a while. We did a large feature on it last year in conjunction with September being National Suicide Awareness Month. The suicide rates among active duty military pretty much mirror the suicide rates among the male population, the young male population. That's nothing to be proud of at all. It's a great cause for concern. But this year, things are looking more grim than usual. The numbers just came out from the Department of Defense, and numbers are about up 20% for suicides since COVID. That is a dramatic increase from last year. And it started right when the COVID restrictions came out. And they did not diminish when COVID restrictions went down. In fact, they kept increasing along with the protests and riots. It's believed that both the increased social isolation and the stress for the deployments, the active deployments against maintaining order, are playing a large part in this. Most of the increase in suicides are being seen among the Army and the National Guard members. So that's a great cause for concern.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of our members struggling with depression and just isolation. And we're going to be linking in the description of this podcast the suicide prevention hotline. And so if anyone is struggling with suicidal ideation or any kind of despair, please reach out either to a professional through the suicide prevention hotline or to friends or community, especially, a religious community or a like-minded community. Just connect, get outside, get some sunlight. It'll all help.
Yep. You can find them online at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And please, whether you are in the military, past military, or completely unaffiliated, reach out. There are people who are just waiting to help you. You don't have to live with those thoughts. You don't have to succumb to the darkness.
And you're not alone.
You are not alone.
So our second order of business is Supreme Court. As we mentioned last week, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and we tried to honor her long history of intelligent service to the country. Now we're looking at the beginning, whether or not the current nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, is in fact confirmed. We are looking at the beginning of a new legacy of service, and who that person is matters a great deal, obviously. So I think that Judge Barrett, who was confirmed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, is a fantastic judge. I am no legal expert, nor am I a watcher of the courts. But in terms of the positions and decisions that she's written that have been trotted out, both by her defenders and her attackers in the last week, she just shines through as someone of great intelligence, of great character, of great articulation, of great erudition, learning, and someone who is a person of great integrity and virtue. So Christine found a wonderful quote. Was it from a decision or?
No, actually, it is discussing. It's a piece that she wrote discussing the issue of stereodesis. One of the things that people have been criticizing her for is that she has said that precedent should not be absolute. We live under.
Perhaps let's backtrack a bit and talk about what stereodesis is.
Right. Stereodesis is the principle that established precedent should be considered when making rulings. And Amy Coney Barrett has written that it should not be absolute. That actually shouldn't be a controversial issue. As anybody familiar with case law knows, there have been some colossally bad rulings of even the Supreme Court, much less lower courts. In fact, the Supreme Court overturns lower court rulings all the time, but they use precedent from lower courts, from English law, all the time as well. So Amy Coney Barrett, in a piece regarding this, wrote, "In a system of precedent, the new majority bears the weight of explaining why the constitutional vision of their predecessors was flawed, and of making the case as to why theirs bears better, captures the meaning of our fundamental law." This is fantastic because it means that a judge and the new majority should not be just making up things. If they're going to overturn precedent, it shouldn't be done lightly. It shouldn't be done on a whim, but it should instead harken back to why the court thinks that their interpretation fundamentally is a better interpretation of the law, and the previous rulings were not faithful to the law. And if, like I was saying, if you go back to your history, the most colossally bad Supreme Court ruling was, of course, the Dred Scott decision, which said that a man and his family had to be returned into slavery. Had this been stood just on a precedent ground, and there was tons of precedent for it, we would still be stuck in a legal morass. And there are many other rulings like this as well. Honestly, I don't know why this should be a political issue, that she is not an absolutist on stereodesis, because people of all political stripes should be pretty glad.
We all know why it's such a political deal, because there's one precedent that both sides are very anxious about, and that's Roe versus Wade. Although most pro-life people who are educated on the matter know that you also need to overturn Planned Parenthood versus Casey if anything needs to actually get done in terms of achieving pro-life policy goals. But both of those are precedent. Both of those would need to be overturned to make any significant headway on abortion policy in a pro-life direction.
And on that regard, I'm not sure Coney Barrett is the great danger to abortion rights that people on the left think she is, nor is she the great activist that people on the right are hoping for either, because she herself has written that it is extremely unlikely the court is going to overturn Roe versus Wade at this point, that the primary
you'd have maybe
battleground,
2 votes given the stances on stereodesis that we already have. And I think Gorsuch is a big maybe, even though I think personally he's probably against it. And personally, Coney Barrett's definitely against it. I think I couldn't count on any of the votes. I think you probably would have 2, but I definitely don't think you'd have 5.
Yeah, and she's written that the battle really isn't about the right to an abortion at this point, or the right to privacy. And I can actually see the arguments for right to medical privacy far more than the right to killing the unborn child, because of what it would take to prevent abortion. Then that is where most of the arguments get made at this point. But she wrote that the right to abortion is pretty well established law, and it's going to be very difficult to overturn it. But where the real arguments are lying, where the real court cases are coming, are on public funding. And on, of course, limitations in later terms.
Yeah, I
And
think
so
we might be able to see something. Is it the Hyde Amendment that always gets ratified by a Republican president and then de-ratified? So that's
Yes.
the thing that basically denies federal funds being used to fund abortion providers, I think internationally. Or maybe it's the Mexico City Agreement. I think that's the one that's always...
The Hyde Amendment is domestic, and the
Right.
Mexico City is international.
Yeah. So Mexico City is the one that flip-flops every time there's a change in parties. And I think that there is a good chance that if pro-life lawyers are smart, they would bring a case that could force the Supreme Court's hand into making a decision on international federal funding of abortion. I think that's the kind of thing that we'd be looking at. We would not be looking at overturning Roe or Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
But the Supreme Court has been notoriously shy about taking these cases overall.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention before we moved on from the Supreme Court is some of the truly vile, and I would call evil, attacks on Amy Coney Barrett's family, particularly the fact that she's adopted 2 Haitian children. Professor or Dr. Ibram X Candy, who is author of the book How to Be Anti-Racist, claimed he wasn't talking about Barrett and her family when he posted a truly vicious series of tweets about how some white people, and he used a lot of weasel words, so you can't actually hammer him on saying mostly, but the implication and the timing was very clear. He was talking about Amy Coney Barrett. He was saying that she is a colonizer who is participating in the justly condemned practice of adopting non-white, indigenous, or Black or African children to make them white on the inside. I, as a person who has a white father and an Asian mother, very much condemn any kind of attempt to erase someone's culture. And I think there were systematic and government-funded programs. The one I know about is in Australia. I don't know. I'm sure there were attitudes similar in America, but I don't know of any federal programs like this.
Unfortunately, there were.
Okay, so I believe that I just was not aware. I condemn them, but I know many people who have adopted interracially, internationally. So both inner city young Black children being adopted by white families or Asian families, and of course, children from China, especially, but other Asian countries being adopted by white families. And they have never attempted to erase those children's heritage. They've never attempted to make them ashamed or pretend to be white. They love them for who they are, and it is a vile calumny of Kendi to suggest that anywhere close to a majority have anything like the kind of colonizer attitude that both he and we rightly condemn, but he sees any such thing as condemnable, and that is evil.
Yeah, I would like to point out we do have a very tragic and lamentable history with our Native Americans as well, with re-education through the Native American school system and through adoption out of the Native American communities of the children. But nowadays, this is a very complex situation which is going on, and I think great effort is being made to an increasing degree to be much more culturally aware and not separate children from their family cultures. But of course, there's so much need as well among these families, and that is just a huge topic in its own right.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds there, but I think the position of War Elephant definitely is that criticism of Judge Barrett's judicial philosophy and any statement she might make is perfectly legitimate.
Yes.
Disagreement is this the foundation of compromise and moving forward. But attacks on her family, particularly attacks on the fact that she is adopted internationally and interracially, are not.
That is correct. And it's quite appalling.
All right, so let's move on to our third item of business, which is the first presidential debate is happening tomorrow, theoretically. Vice President Biden has called a lid, which is he's basically said, I'm not doing, or his team has said he's not doing anymore on over half the days in September. Maybe it's so he can have enough energy to participate in the debate. I hope so. I cannot vote for Vice President Biden, but I very much hope that he is doing well and is in good health, because he does not appear to be. So I think there is a chance that he might not be able to participate in the debate. What are your thoughts going into this debate?
I actually think that he's been advised that it might not be a great thing, Ian. If you look at the editorials among most of the newspapers today, by far and away, the overall consensus among left-leaning newspapers, which would be the majority of them, was that we don't need presidential debates. They are outdated. It is ridiculous and absurd for presidents to get on television and talk directly to the voters or with each other to compare and contrast their ideas, to allow us to form our own opinions. That we're much better off just getting our information filtered from the campaigns and from the media. That was the New York Times, the Washington Post, many of the major city newspapers today.
What about Daily Beast and Mother Coast?
That's a good question. They thought that we shouldn't have debates either.
So actually, this brings up one of the things I wanted to talk about with regards to the debates. I didn't watch any of the debates last cycle with Hillary Clinton and President Trump. I still haven't watched them. I find them mostly tedious and narcissistic on the candidate's part. And even though I have perhaps a bit too much cynicism in my approach to politics, I don't want to encourage that in myself. So I tend to avoid it. And I pay enough attention to politics that nothing they say in the debates really surprises me. So part of me thinks that even though I think there's a deeply cynical and self-serving motive to the left-leaning press's attempt to lay the groundwork to Biden either not participating at all or participating much less than any previous presidential candidate since the 1970s, when they started back up again. I do wonder about their utility to voters. What do you think? Do you think they are useful?
I do. I actually do. Ian, a presidential debate gives us a chance to watch how our potential presidents are going to respond unscripted. And quite frankly, you know how I feel about Donald Trump. I am not a big fan. And part of that is because he does not think before he speaks. And
well,
so
I
we've
do
gotten
want to take a step back. I want to take a step back from that, because I think that on the whole, I agree in terms of Trump's discipline and his character, from which the comments that we dislike, they come from a place of bullying and narcissism. And I don't think either of those are good qualities. But his response to learning of Justice Ginsburg's death was mature.
It was beautiful.
It was
absolutely beautiful. And there have been other times he's spoken actually without any advisors that I've also been extremely impressed. Everyone makes quite a bit of hay over the interview with COVID-19, where he said he wanted to downplay COVID-19. But as a scientist, when I listened to it, I was hearing there the concern over the public response that the CDC was very concerned about. I didn't like their handling of the situation personally. I had a lot more trust in the American people, but I understood where that was coming from. I don't like paternalism. And he was thoughtful. And he was still unscripted. And I would like to see way more of that.
So yeah, I think my point there was that I do think that Trump has actually grown. Not as much as I'd like to see. He's still not a candidate I think is at all ideal. But I do think that there is evidence that we can point to concretely that he has grown in leadership and in some virtues. So I can definitely see how that might be useful when portrayed against Joe Biden, especially since Joe Biden really has not been able to be disciplined in his campaign appearances since the primary debates. He was fairly disciplined in the primary debates, but he wasn't very energetic. And he's been a lot more energetic on the campaign trail, but he's been incredibly indisciplined. He just says these. I don't understand the leg hair thing. He did a whole story about leg hair, and I still don't understand it.
I think we might be getting a case here of two older men at this point.
Yes.
I love older people, and they say what they want to say. But the truth is, what these debates offer us is a chance to see our candidates without being managed, that they are giving us themselves, and without the opposition also framing who they are. And we get way too much of that. Republicans hear about Democrats through Republican framing a lot. They don't hear directly from the Democrats that much. You don't go to Democratic rallies and hear Democrat people speak all that often. You're probably not watching CNN unless you really want to get insulted a lot. You're probably not reading Politico or Slate. I do, but a lot of people probably don't. They aren't reading the
Well, I
Huffington
promised
Post.
myself I'd never click on a Slate article again after I spent a full month just enraged after reading a bunch of it. So it wasn't good for me.
Right. But a lot of people have tuned out so much of what they disagree with that they aren't getting the perspectives and the thoughts of candidates that aren't coming directly from what they perceive to be their side. And I think that's a huge loss. These debates offer one of these few opportunities that we have to actually hear from the horse's mouth what's going on. And that goes across the other side too. How often in this day are Democrats getting to hear from Republicans directly and unfiltered? And I think that is an enormously valuable service.
Yeah, I guess we'll see tomorrow. That actually gives me a new perspective. I guess we'll see. Although I'm going to be busy tomorrow night, so I can't watch it live, but I might watch some clips. Which is more than I've ever done for any of the Trump-Hillary debates. Let's move on to our final order of business, which is also related to the military, but it's Republican campaign ads. We've had two major Republican campaign ads being dropped recently. The first is a multi-candidate ad for Dan Crenshaw and I think 5 other candidates in Texas for various offices, mostly for the House, but I think there were a couple other positions being run for. Or was it all congressional?
It was all congressional.
So the ad is very much drawing from pop culture. There's a lot of references to the Marvel Avengers films and the Expendables and the classic 80s, that thing where Arnold Schwarzenegger and the black guy grip hands and they're very manly. It's just all these action movie things. It was very amusing, although I mentioned to Christine that they're very clearly not actors. So they weren't quite doing it for me, but I would probably vote for them anyway if I were in Texas. So this is clearly, well, what do you think the audience for this is, Christine?
I think the audience is pretty wide, and we should probably put a link to these videos when we're done because they are worth watching. They are fantastic. This one, the audience is people who aren't politically engaged, who are tired of hearing negative messages, who really want to believe in a better America, who do believe in a better America for all Americans, and are tired of maybe the same boring old lines from politicians. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get inundated with these flyers from both political parties, And they all look the same. They all look the same. And you watch political ads and they all sound the same. Vote for me. I love people and I love doing the right thing. And my opponent hates America at this point. I mean,
or the classic one that Joe Biden has been doing a lot, which is, I have a very sad story, and because of that, you should vote for me so that I will keep your health care. That's a very common one.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the campaigns are just running on fear now. And this had nothing to do with that. I really think this targeted young voters. This targeted disaffected voters. And it was entertaining. It was engaging. I've shown it to a few people who aren't big on politics, who are really disillusioned with how politics is going. And they just smiled and they're like, I like that.
And I think that is a big thing that ads need to do, which is leave you with, well, ads that I would prefer. The fear ads do stick with you, but I think that the kind of ad I would like to see are the kinds that leave you with a fun association, a smile, so that when you're in that ballot box, you're like, oh yeah, Crenshaw, or whatever your candidate was in that video. He was funny. He was that chopper pilot. He was that karate or jujitsu or aikido lady. Like, you have that association now that humanizes them and gives you a pleasant association. And that's a big thing in the decision-making process.
And you know what else that ad did? And it challenged people's assumptions about what Republicans are and what they stand for. And that has been so long overdue. You know, we conservatives have allowed ourselves to be painted into a corner about what we represent. I was just watching the movie Lincoln, and there's a scene in that movie where the entire House of Congress is together and they're passing the 13th Amendment. And at this point, of course, the southern states have seceded, so they're not involved in this decision. It's a Republican Congress. A Republican Congress under a Republican president abolishing slavery. And everyone is absolutely ecstatic. This is a very well-researched historical film. And that kind of excitement has gone back in the conservative movement for a long time. And if you go to the major civil rights legislation, was passed by a majority of Republicans. 80% of Republicans in Congress voted for the civil rights legislation, whereas only a handful of Democrats did. And yet we've allowed ourselves to be painted into this corner that conservative values are really only for one tiny subset of people, when those values are for every single American. And I think this kind of ad campaign is saying, we stand for everybody. And I really like that.
And the second ad that I wanted to highlight is for the Democratic Congress candidate, Kim Klacik. And she dropped a really popular first ad in which she wore a red dress. And she really hammered home the state of Baltimore's streets and also the hunger she has for change that she's hoping she can strike into many other people. She just dropped a second ad in which she wears a white dress and just goes throughout Baltimore. And I was just flabbergasted at how much money she was able to raise for this ad. It was phenomenal, the level of computer graphics and camera work and people who were part of the ad. And that was really the connection I was making. The people in this ad, she's shooting for, she wants everyone, but she knows that Baltimore is a city driven more than usual by the African-American vote. And she's an African-American woman. She's very, she's just so savvy. She and her team are so savvy. And she ends the ad with a rising shot of her surrounded by mostly Black, but also either a Muslim or a Hindu lady on crutches. So you've got disability, you've got a different religion than she is, and you have all these women, white, Black, brown, tan, just so many women, and they're excited. Now, I don't know, it's an ad, so maybe they're all paid, but they seem to be the kind of non-actors that I was talking about in the other ad.
And they're all dressed in red, which of course has come to be associated with Republicans. And
so she's in white, they're in red, and it's just this beautiful image on Baltimore streets. And I know this is cheating, but I watched The Wire. I love The Wire. And so the streets of Baltimore are very visually distinctive to someone who's watched all 50 hours of that show. They're really recognizable because of their certain level of both. There's a lot of love and character in them, but there's also just a lot of suffering. And part of the ad was she wants to get the corruption out of the politics, and there's just enormous corruption. The Wire is from a Democratic perspective, but it is completely honest about the fact that Democratic politics, which run Baltimore, are insanely corrupt. And of course, Republicans can be corrupt too, but a party change can very much help to root out some of that corruption.
Yeah. But one of the things her first ad made me question was, why are you running for Congress?
Yeah, I wish she was running for mayor or city council.
Right. But her second ad answered that question. Because she laid out her plan. And her plan was opportunities for jobs. Her plan was bringing housing funds that allowed people to rehabilitate and purchase all of the abandoned buildings. Her plan was helping bring federal funds in to help clean up the city so that they didn't have all the trash building up. You know, she had a plan, and it was a plan that actually needed outside help. You know, it said this problem was bigger than just the city, and they needed more help. And, you know, I was a little skeptical, and I'm like, you know, I watched this and I'm sold. So that was a big deal.
Well, I think that she's very smart, not just in public relations, but also she's got plans. I still wish she was going for something local, because if we could build a local Republican Party in Maryland, that would be huge. Now, Maryland has had a tradition of Republican governors. Their current governor, Larry Hogan, is very popular and a Republican. But that's an anomaly. Their local level politics tend to be exclusively Democrat. And if we could get a foothold in that, or she could use this as a stepping stone to become a local force or even some kind of senatorial force, I don't know. But I think she's got a career in front of her. She's clearly made a huge splash. She's the kind of person who can have a plan. And even if she doesn't win, she's part of what Republicans need to do, which is chisel away. We don't need to win the non-white vote. What we need to do is not just focus on the white vote, because
we need to show up.
Right. Our policies aren't just for white people, but our policies are perceived that way. And if someone like Kim Klacik or someone like John James, I think of Michigan, and of course Senator Tim Scott of Alabama, these people show that these are not white person policies. They are policies that work for all Americans. And so I am very heartened by what both of these ads say about what the new up-and-coming Republican Party is.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because I was really excited about, here in Minnesota, Lacey Johnson's campaign when he challenged Ilhan Omar. I thought he was fantastic. But he didn't win. I mean, she won quite overwhelmingly. And I think this was a tough year to be a challenger to an incumbent. It remains a tough year with COVID. Is just difficult to get out there and campaign against anyone. But Republicans have got to stop just saying, we can't win in these areas. We're not even going to show up, and we're not going to try, and we're not going to be involved in the communities. We're going to just turn over.
Because if you can shave that margin, we don't have to win, but if we get 10% of that margin of those people, we can win.
Well, and it's not only about winning, it's actually about hearts and minds, and getting some of this rhetoric that has just gotten so divisive is built on an us versus them mentality. That is a false narrative. And part of it is being able to spread simply because we've abdicated the entire concept of being present in entire communities. And so without us showing up and showing that all of these communities matter to us and that their rights are what we're fighting for, that we want programs that help them, that our programs will help them, our ideas are important, that we share values with them, that all of our communities, we are really one America. When we don't do that, when we don't show up, all we do is allow more divisive politics to really take hold. and fear and distrust to spread.
And that, of course, is what our podcast and our community are standing against. We stand for dialogue. We stand for respect, relaxed, and researched. So if you like what you've heard here, please like and subscribe to our podcast here on YouTube. Join our Discord. We have a link in the description. We're very active. We have a lot of different perspectives, centrist and liberal, as well as a lot of conservatives. But the conservatives, we don't all agree. We've got libertarians, and we've got paleocons, we've got isolationists, we've got myself, the neocon, all kinds of perspectives.
Classical liberals.
Yeah, we've got all of them. So join us. We're glad you've watched. Thank you for the comments. It's been a very pleasant evening, and we'll see you next Monday night.
Thank you very much.